You really showed up wearing that, she sneered. That was the first thing my daughter-in-law ever said to me, on her wedding day. My name is Margaret Ellison. I'm 62 years old, and I have never been so publicly humiliated in my life. Until that day at Sycamore Ridge Estate in northern Georgia, I thought dignity and kindness still had a place in this world. I was wrong. But I would learn something else too, that control when handled quietly is the sharpest blade there is. The wedding of my only son, Daniel, to a woman named Madison Connors, should have been a celebration. Instead, it became a lesson she would never forget. I arrived at the reception 10 minutes after the ceremony ended. My soft blue dress was wrinkle-free, my posture perfect. My mother's pearls rested just above my collarbone. I looked every inch the woman I was raised to be. Poised, polite, reserved. But Madison saw none of that. She saw an obstacle. As I approached their table, still holding the envelope containing the documents to a sizable trust fund I had quietly prepared for them, I smiled at my son. "Congratulations, darling," I said, kissing Daniel on the cheek. He smiled weakly. "Glad you made it, Mom." Then I turned to her. "And Madison, welcome to the family." She didn't smile. "Oh," she said loudly, "you're finally here." Heads turned. "I was beginning to think you didn't care enough to show up." "I came straight from the airport," I said, ignoring the jab. "I wouldn't have missed this day for the world." "That's funny," she said, taking a sip of champagne. "You missed the ceremony. You missed meeting my family. And you clearly missed the memo about the dress code." She eyed my simple heels and my handmade clutch like they were trash. Daniel said nothing. I had warned him. But love is louder than reason in your 20s. My mother was dying to see what kind of woman raises a man who proposes with a ring from the bargain bin, Madison added with a giggle. The table went quiet. Daniel shifted. "Madison, maybe now's not." "Oh please," she cut him off. "Your mother should be grateful she's even invited. At least try to look the part, Margaret. This isn't some bingo night at the senior center." That stung. But I didn't react. I had learned long ago that people only embarrass you if you let them. "I'm sorry if I've disappointed you," I said calmly. "Oh, you have." She stood up, wobbly from too much champagne. "Let me help you match the rest of your look." And without warning, she grabbed a fistful of wedding cake. Vanilla, 3-tiered, decorated with gold-trimmed roses, and smashed it into my face. Gasps. The music stopped. Conversations froze. Someone dropped a glass. The frosting clung to my eyelashes, my pearls, my lips. Then, as if scripted, she said loud enough for the entire room to hear. "There. Cheap and messy. Just like your dress." The room held its breath. I reached into my handbag, pulled out a monogrammed handkerchief, and wiped the cake from my mouth with practiced grace. "How thoughtful of you," I said, "though the frosting is a bit too sweet for my taste." That's when I heard it. A voice from across the room, sharp, clear, and stunned. "Wait, is that Margaret Ellison? The founder of Ellison Steelworks?" I turned. A woman in a crimson gown stood near the bar, hand over her mouth. "She owns that entire waterfront in Charleston. Oh my God, she's worth billions." I didn't flinch. I just turned to Madison and leaned in close. "Enjoy your moment," I whispered. "Because it's the last one you'll have at my expense." And I walked away, silent and composed, as whispers ignited around the room like dry leaves catching fire. Madison didn't follow me. Neither did Daniel. I stepped into my car, a forest green Bentley parked near the valet, and closed the door behind me. Then I exhaled. She thought I had nothing. She was about to learn I had everything. And I was about to remind her what real power looks like. As the Bentley glided through the Georgia hills, I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't call anyone. I just drove in silence, my thoughts sharper than they had been in years. The estate was quiet when I returned. 200 acres of Oakline Drive, fountains, and history wrapped in brick and ivy. My housekeeper, Rosie, met me at the door, eyes wide. "You're back early." "Change of plans," I said. "Whole dinner." "I need my study." She nodded, and I moved through the house like a woman with a mission. Inside the study, oak-paneled, book-lined, quiet, I opened the antique wall panel and revealed a safe behind one of the framed oil paintings. My late husband, Charles, had this installed when we were first married. He always said, people trust vaults, but a woman should always keep her own. Inside were the documents, trust agreements, business shares, legal records. Charles and I had built Ellison Steelworks from the ground up. By the time he passed, we were sitting on an empire. Daniel was my only child. Everything in the trust bore his name, but not without conditions. I pulled out the file labeled marriage clauses. Charles had insisted we add them after watching one too many heiresses lose their fortunes to flashy charmers. Protect Daniel, he said when the ink dried. From the world. From himself if you have to. And we had. The documents were precise. Any spouse would only gain access to interest generated during the marriage. No claim to the principal. No gifts exceeding $25,000 without my written approval. No disbursement if the marriage brought disharmony or reputational harm to the Ellison family. Madison had violated every condition before the ink on her name change even dried. The video was already trending. Her face smug. My face frosted. The caption, Bridezilla humiliates billionaire mother-in-law. And the comments? The grace that woman showed. How did he marry someone like that? That bride just committed social suicide. I didn't feel angry. I felt ready. I spent the next 3 hours making annotations, drafting notes, calling in favors. First to my attorney Samuel Webb. He'd handled Ellison legal affairs for 35 years. Margaret, he answered on the second ring. I saw the footage. Jesus. I want a full audit on Daniel's portion of the trust, I said. And I want to activate the family protection clauses. He was silent for a beat. You're serious? Deadly. He cleared his throat. I'll be at your house by noon. The second call was to Heather, my assistant of 20 years. Heather, darling. I need a full background check on Madison Connors. Every transaction, every membership, every organization she's tried to join. She didn't ask why. She didn't have to. Also, I added, pull the application she submitted to the Charleston Women's Foundation last spring. Oh, that's going to be good, she said, already typing. Madison had spent the past year positioning herself for a lifestyle she didn't earn, networking with charity boards, applying to high society clubs, and attaching herself to Daniel like a brand upgrade. That ends now. The next morning, Samuel arrived in a gray suit and grave expression. I brought everything, he said, placing his briefcase on the table. And I've reviewed the footage. Her behavior falls well within the disharmony clause. You can shut everything down. And I will. Daniel? He'll learn in time. We sat in silence as I signed amendment after amendment. By the end of the hour, the trust had been restructured. Madison was legally blocked from touching 1 cent of the Ellison wealth, unless I gave express written consent. And I had no intention of doing that. Send notice to the bank, I said. Freeze the discretionary funds. Inform the accountants. And, I paused. Yes. Draft a letter to the board of the Charleston Women's Foundation. I think they should know what kind of woman they were about to welcome. Samuel raised a brow. Subtle. Not revenge, I said. Just clarity. After he left, I poured myself a glass of iced tea and stepped into the garden. The air smelled like rosemary and rain. I watched the fountain in the center courtyard, built by Charles on our 10th anniversary, spill water over the stone lip. When we started this empire, we thought we were building something just for Daniel. But now I see we were building something to protect him from exactly this. I had trusted him to choose well. He hadn't. 3 days passed before I heard from Daniel. He called just after dinner. The phone rang twice before I answered. Hi, Mom. His voice was quiet. Careful. Yes, sweetheart. There was a pause. Then, Madison's not doing well. I'm sorry to hear that. She's saying she's being frozen out of accounts. That your name is suddenly required for anything over a few $100s. Did you do that? I did, I said simply. Another pause. Why? I leaned back in the armchair, the same one Charles used to sit in after board meetings. Because your wife humiliated me. Publicly. Violated the legal boundaries of the family trust. And did so in front of 200 witnesses, some of them members of our board of directors. But she was drunk, she didn't mean Intent is irrelevant, I said. Consequences are not. Mom, she's crying. She thinks she's ruined everything. I looked at the untouched slice of pound cake on my plate. She has. But not in the way she thinks. I didn't know you'd go this far. I didn't know you'd sit there and let her do it. Silence. She was nervous. Overwhelmed. No, I said sharply. She was calculating. She thought I was powerless. And you didn't stop her. He didn't answer right away. Are you cutting me off too? No, I said. You'll always have your inheritance. But she won't benefit from it unless she earns it. She made herself a liability, not a partner. He sighed. She's already called a lawyer. She'll need a good one. And I ended the call. By the end of the week, the fallout began. Madison's name was removed from the Charleston Women's Foundation newsletter. Her pending application to the Atlanta Social Guild was indefinitely postponed. The Charleston Chronicles Society column ran a short but devastating line. Madison Connorshale's behavior at the Ellison wedding has sparked quiet concern among those reviewing her recent board applications. The whispers did more damage than any press release. She posted a carefully filtered photo on Instagram of her quiet afternoon tea with the caption, "Gratitude for grace in the face of gossip." The comments weren't kind. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The social world she worked so hard to climb into was already pulling away. There's one thing old money knows how to do well: circle the wagons. Meanwhile, Heather handed me the final background report. Madison was not only in debt up to her eyelashes, she had also applied for 3 private loans in the months leading up to the wedding, using projections from Daniel's future inheritance as income justification. She was planning her shopping spree before the vows, Heather said. And now she'll be returning it all. Daniel invited me to dinner a week later. Madison wasn't there. He looked tired, worn, a little smaller. We ate at the River Birch Club, our usual spot before he met her. Mom, he said halfway through the meal. Did you ever? Not like Dad's family? I set my fork down. I didn't like how they treated me. But your father made it clear. Respect wasn't optional. He looked down. She keeps saying you're trying to control her. I'm not trying to control her, I said. I'm protecting what your father and I built. And I'm reminding her that no one humiliates this family and walks away with the spoils. Daniel looked up, eyes glassy. I think I made a mistake. I took his hand gently. Then fix it. I don't know how. You start by asking yourself, do you want a marriage? Or did you want a lifestyle? He blinked, and for the first time in years I saw my son again. The boy who used to bring me hand-drawn thank you cards and say, "Thank you for my lunch, Mom," without being asked. Do you hate her? No, I said. But I've stopped protecting her. We sat in silence, the sound of silverware clinking faintly around us. I didn't know you were still this sharp, he finally said. Then you haven't been paying attention. 2 days later, Madison showed up at my estate unannounced. I opened the front door myself. She stood there in oversized sunglasses, clutching a designer bag I'd seen in at least 5 influencers' hands. You ruined me, she said. No, I replied. You did that yourself. I simply documented it. Tears welled in her eyes. I didn't know who you were. I thought you were just a woman in a blue dress with no taste? I offered. She looked down. You married into a legacy, Madison. But you treated it like a lottery ticket. We're not here to be your sponsors. I can fix it, she said. I can make it right. No, I said. You can't. But you can start over. She looked up sharply. What do you mean? You have nothing now. No money. No influence. No access. And that means for the first time in your life, you can decide who you want to become without the illusion of wealth. Take that as a gift. You're cutting me off. I'm giving you an opportunity, I said, to grow or disappear. That part is up to you. She didn't answer. The call came at 6:42 in the morning. I was in my garden, pruning the last of the summer roses, the kind of morning Charles used to call money-colored. Bright, brisk, full of quiet potential. My phone buzzed once, then again. It was Daniel. I let it ring twice before answering. Mom, he said, his voice brittle. She's gone. Gone where? She moved out, took her things, left a note, said she couldn't take being humiliated anymore. Said I let you bulldoze her life. And did you? He sighed heavily. I don't know. Yes, you do. I let her do it, he said. At the wedding. I didn't stop her. Now, I'm not sure if I ever actually knew her. The words sat there raw and broken. She married your last name, I said. Not your heart. I think she was just afraid, he whispered. Maybe. But fear doesn't justify cruelty. She wanted what we had, but she didn't want to understand where it came from. Then she didn't want you, Daniel. She wanted your inheritance. There was silence. The wind rustled through the hedges. Somewhere in the distance, the gate buzzer chirped. You're not angry? He asked. No, I said. I'm relieved. Now we can begin. Begin what? Restoring your name. That afternoon I called a family meeting. Just Daniel and me. We sat in the same sunroom where I had read him stories as a child. His old drawing of a castle still hung on the back wall, crayon lines faded but proud. I've reinstated your full access to the trust, I told him. With stipulations. He nodded. You'll still need approval for anything over $500,000. No gifts to spouses unless the marriage lasts 5 years. And no dissolving of any Ellison property without majority consent from the family council. He smiled faintly. So I get my life back with training wheels. With guardrails, I corrected. You're still the heir, Daniel. But now I hope you're ready to lead. And Madison? She'll be fine, I said. She'll cry, complain, throw tantrums to whoever will listen. But eventually she'll adapt. You're not going to ruin her? I looked him in the eye. Daniel, I'm not her. 1 week later a letter arrived. Handwritten. Slanted. 2 pages long. From Madison. The words were a blend of apology, denial, and desperation. She admitted she'd acted poorly. Blamed pressure. Blamed champagne. Blamed me. But what struck me most was this line. I just thought you were someone I could push around. I didn't know you mattered. That was it. The root of it. She saw an older woman with a quiet voice and assumed weakness. She didn't realize. The quiet ones are the ones who watch. Who remember. Who move last and win. I folded the letter and placed it in the fire. She would not be part of our future. Not in conversation. Not in legacy. The real change came quietly. Daniel began showing up at the office again. He shadowed the board meetings. Met with suppliers. Asked the kind of questions that told me he wasn't just listening, he was learning. At one meeting he even corrected a logistics error before I caught it. Afterward I took him aside. Your father would be proud, I said. He nodded. But I could see the weight in his eyes. Sometimes I wonder, he said, if I married her just to feel like I earned something. Like if I had someone shiny enough beside me, it would prove I wasn't just living off your legacy. Daniel, I said gently, the people who try to prove their worth with glitter usually end up bankrupt. He smiled. And the ones who build slowly? They end up like us. Meanwhile, Madison tried to claw her way back. Heather forwarded me screenshots from social media. She posted pictures of old vacations with Daniel, quotes about narcissistic in-laws, and hinted at a toxic household. She shared curated stories to make herself look like the victim. None of it worked. Because when you aim at power and miss, the noise you make is just dust. Every board that once considered her now flagged her name. She didn't just lose access to our family's resources. She lost access to the social circles she once craved. And worst of all, no one took her calls anymore. On a Friday evening, as the leaves began to turn, I hosted a dinner. Not a fundraiser. Not a gala. Just family. Daniel sat beside me. Across from us, my goddaughter Lucy and her husband Evan. Old friends, loyal partners, steady voices. Halfway through dessert, Daniel leaned over. You think she'll try to come back? She already has, I said. Twice. And she asked for money. Said she needed help. I declined. What did she say? That I'd regret it. He raised an eyebrow. And will you? No, I said calmly. Because I didn't build this family to be held hostage by desperation. He looked at me like he'd never really seen me before. I used to think you were just Reserved, he said. No, I replied. I was strategic. That night, after everyone left, I sat on the porch and opened the last envelope Heather had given me. Inside was a final summary. Madison had moved to Florida, changed her social media bios, rebranded herself as a luxury lifestyle coach. She had no job, no savings, no access to Daniel's trust. 2 months later, Daniel stopped by the estate unannounced. It was a cold morning, gray skies, dew on the hedges, the kind of day that demanded quiet clarity. He looked older somehow, not tired, just more certain. I filed the papers, he said. For what? The annulment. I didn't flinch. I just set down my teacup and nodded. I'm sorry it took me this long to see it, he said. But now that I have, I can't unsee it. You never needed to explain yourself to me, I said. But I'm proud you chose peace over appearances. He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for weeks. We sat in the garden together without speaking. Sometimes the silence says more than words ever could. Then he asked something I didn't expect. Do you think I'll find someone who loves me for me? Not for this? He gestured toward the estate. The legacy. Yes, I said. But not until you love yourself without it first. He nodded slowly. I'm working on that. That afternoon, I visited Charles's memorial at the far end of the garden. He would have handled all of this differently, but I like to think he would have been proud of the way I did it. I left a single white rose by the plaque and whispered, "The house is in order." The fallout from Madison's departure didn't ripple far. She tried once more to reach out, through an intermediary this time. A friend of a friend. She wanted to apologize. Said she had grown. But growth takes longer than a few months, and humility doesn't need a messenger. I declined the meeting. Instead, I turned my focus inward, toward Daniel, toward the company, toward the next chapter. Heather and I began planning the Ellison Foundation's 40th anniversary gala. A celebration of legacy, yes, but more importantly, of women who build, lead, and endure. I decided to make a personal announcement at the gala. Something I'd never done before. A speech. I stood in front of 300 guests, lit by chandeliers and years of quiet strength, and said, some people spend their lives building empires. Others spend it trying to marry into them. But what I've learned is this. Real power is not loud. It's not cruel. And it never needs permission to walk away from chaos. The room applauded. Daniel stood in the front row. Not as a son clinging to approval, but as a man finally standing on his own. The next morning, I received a handwritten letter. No return address. Just 4 words on the outside. You were right. M. I read it once, then tucked it in the back of my ledger. Not for revenge. Not for evidence. For closure. She finally saw it. Not the wealth. Not the name. But me. And that was enough. As summer returned, so did peace. Daniel began dating again. Slowly, quietly, cautiously. I didn't ask questions. I didn't give warnings. I had said my piece. The rest was his to live. One afternoon, as we sat by the pond where Charles and I used to walk, Daniel said, "You're not what I thought you were when I was younger. What did you think I was? Distant, formal, cold sometimes. And now, precise," he said, "and powerful." I smiled. "Don't mistake quiet for weakness," I said. "That's how your ex-wife lost everything." He laughed. Not bitterly, just honestly. And then he said something I will never forget. "Mom, thank you for saving me from a life that would have looked beautiful on the outside and emptied me on the inside." I reached over and took his hand. "You saved yourself." I just pulled back the curtain. And so the story closed not with screaming or scandal or revenge, but with resolution. A woman once smeared with cake at her son's wedding now stood taller than ever. Not because she struck back loudly, but because she knew how to wait. Because she knew who she was. And because she remembered something Madison never understood. Power doesn't shout. It whispers. And when it's done right, it never has to repeat itself.